My name is Chris Potter. I'm a jazz saxophonist living in Brooklyn. One of the beautiful things about the saxophone, I think, is how similar it can be to a human voice. I feel like with the select jazz reads that I can get that singing feeling on a consistent basis on the road day after day, They do work top to bottom and I can articulate with them. I can do all the things that I demand of the read. The whole point is to get to a feeling where you're not thinking about the read, you're not thinking about the room. Select jazz reads definitely do help.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to Conversations presented by Diadario. My name is Alex Hahn, and I'm super, super excited and looking forward to talking with someone I'm meeting for the first time, who's one of my favorite saxophone players. He's played with Kurt Rosenwinkel. He's played with Kurt Elling. He's played with Ari Honig. Please help me welcome Mr. Will Vinson. How you doing today, Will?
I'm good, thanks. How are you, Alex?
I'm doing great. So I would love to talk to you about some of the gear that you're playing, some of your influences growing up, kind of your life as a musician, especially that's happening today. So let's kind of dive right in. What's the Diadario gear that you're using these days?
Well, I've been using Hemke reeds, strength 3 for like 20 years, I think. Yeah, I moved to New York in '99. I was very frustrated with another brand that I won't mention, but you get you have reads are so personal and infuriating, but when you have a affinity to like the good version, like the platonic version of the brand of reed that you use, it's really hard to switch. But I had a period of changing like buying a bunch of different stuff and changing excuse me, periodically. And as anybody who's a saxophone player knows, that's like one of the most frustrating periods of your life. and somebody so Hemke used to come in those silver boxes, those kind of shiny silver boxes. And I'd always seen them there in the shop, but I'd never known anybody who used them or never used them myself. And then I just a tenor saxophone player called Mike Webster, you would remember, but like 20 years ago we were doing a session and he told me that's what he was using. And I just took a punt and bought it. It was convenient that they come in 5, so I didn't have to spend as much money.
Right.
And I bought a pack, and that was 20 years ago, and I have not really entertained the idea of using anything else. Occasionally someone will give me something to try, and I'm like, nah. And also, like it's I don't have to try to make this plug. I mean, really, like no other type of reed that I've used has given me more than like, let's say 3 out of a box of 10 that I can use. And I use like almost every reed that comes out of the Hemke box, at least 4 out of 5. I mean, it's kind of amazing. So, but no, there's a darkness to them that I really like. Being an alto player, you're very conscious of the propensity to slip into the bright side, as it were. But they still have a lot of life to them, and it's just it's home for me now. It's Hemke reeds. I was really worried actually when I was talking to when I first established a relationship with Diadario about 7 or 8 years ago, and they were shaking things up a little bit, and I was worried they were going to ditch the Hemke brand. I mean, I know that it's like it's kind of the different strains of the same reed. It's not like they come from a different planet. but still, it made me really anxious, the idea that I wouldn't be able to have those little boxes. They've changed the design a bit, but they're still called Hemke, so so I'm okay for now.
Yeah, I love to hear that. To me, I think, you know, with gear especially, it can be such a slippery slope, like you said, like changing things and changing the reed and changing this and changing that. And to me, that consistency is so important, especially with the reed.
Yeah, exactly. Especially with the reed. The reed is more important than the mouthpiece or the horn, as far as I'm concerned. Like, I mean, you know, so I'm you might not gather this from my playing really, but I'm definitely somebody who I don't have, you know, obviously I have my vocabulary and I have things that, you know, that if you know my playing, that you'll recognize that I play. Like, I can't help that. But when I put the horn in my mouth, I don't just have the ability to just, you know, play material regardless of whatever else is happening. And for me, like, all of the inspiration that I need from myself comes from just the physical feeling, you know, the vibration in my skull and the sound that I'm producing. And if I'm not producing what sounds to me like a good sound, like a pretty sound, I just can't do anything. And I mean, I almost literally cannot play the saxophone. and you know, there are a few things that affect that, like the room. You know, I was listening to that bit that Chris was doing. Suddenly I've gone all hoarse. I don't know why.
No worries.
And he was talking about, you know, trying to forget the room, and that's, you know, that's a big one, because if you're used to, I mean, especially like in this era where most of our playing, let's face it, is done in our rooms at home, you get used to a certain room, the way a room sounds, and then you're in front of an audience in a different space, or in a studio or something. And if the room doesn't sound right, that can really preoccupy you. But that's one of the big ones. But the biggest thing is the reed. And if you have a reed that you know is going to, you know, deliver as much of what a reed can deliver to give you your sound, then you're in much better shape. So, like, I could play somebody else's horn and it might take me a minute to get used to it, or a different mouthpiece. I mean, I've lost mouthpieces and I've broken them and stuff, and it's like, you know, it's not a happy moment. But honestly, like, if I found myself in a city, well, actually I did recently, found myself in a city like down to my last Hemke reed, and I had to try to find someone. They just weren't any, and I had to contemplate using something else, or use like a Hemke reed that I'd been using for so long that it had like dried out a few times and like chipped. I used that rather than I mean, I bought a couple of things, tried to use something else, but no, forget it. So yeah, that's number one, and everything else is you know, I mean, it's important. My horn is very important to me. It's an extension of, you know, my musical being, but no, I mean, when it comes down to it, if the reed isn't right, you're in trouble. And if the reed is right, like, actually, you know, it lifts me into being a better musician than I am otherwise, because of what I'm hearing and what I'm feeling physically. And I use the D'Addario ligature, which I find really, I mean, I'm not a massive gear nerd, and I haven't gone down the rabbit hole with ligature as some other people, but I do find it really, you know, the design it's pretty simple, but it's very easily, you know, I mean, there are some other ligatures that are really fussy, and you have to like get everything balanced right, and it's like it all, you know, goes out of whack, and that one doesn't, which is really really nice. So yeah, I mean, that's it. And then of course, you know, I do probably a little bit more than I should mess around with mouthpieces a little bit. So I have a Ted Klum mouthpiece that I really like, and I've used for a really long time. But of course, I also have the D'Addario Select Jazz mouthpiece.
Oh, nice.
And I was involved with the team out in LA in developing that. Again, like not as I think they invited me out there because I don't really know much about gear. Like they wanted somebody who wasn't going to be able to tell them how to do their job. You know what I mean?
Sure,
And tell them all the features, all the physical, scientific features of the mouthpiece. Because that's just not my brain. I could just play and be like, well, this is easy, or this sucks, or and so they would somehow, in their amazing hive mind, like interpret the sort of vague stuff that I was saying and continue to improve the mouthpiece until it came out. But actually here, well, we'll probably talk about what my life has been like in the pandemic later, but I don't have as much stuff with me as I usually do. Put it that way.
I love that you brought up sound and how it's hard for you to play when you don't feel like your sound is happening. Because to me, the sound is for number one, the first thing that we hear, and number two, the most important thing is if you don't have a good sound, it doesn't even matter what you're playing. And one of my favorite alto tones is Cannonball, and I know you're a big Cannonball fan. Can you talk about some of your favorite records of Cannonball, some of the things that you learned transcribing Cannonball, and some of those things?
Well, what I learned from transcribing Cannonball, and I'm not like the world's biggest transcriber either, actually, but
interesting.
But obviously I've done some. What I learned from transcribing him, which it may seem obvious to some people, but like his note choices are really elegant and playful and really fun to hear and fun to have on your fingers and everything. And his sound, he's got this like beautiful buoyant sound. It's just like makes you smile. But what I love from transcribing and trying to play what he plays is that stuff, as much as it hits you, and as powerful as it is, and as kind of universal as it is in the way that it speaks to listeners, the one thing that is just that makes him for me is his time. And if you try to play, as I did, if you try to play his solos without anything approaching the kind of time feel that he had, then it just sounds like disembodied and the combination of those three things. I mean, those three pretty big things, sound, note choices, and time. But like they're like the three stools that hold up the Cannonball sound, the three stool legs, and you remove one of them and it's just none of it's there.
Agreed. Sound and time to me is Cannonball completely embodies that. And to me, like, this is something I say, it's kind of silly, but to me, Cannonball is like the swaggiest alto player. Like the vibrato, the scoops, the bends, the glissandos, the rips up, the rips down. Like, to me, there's just so much more than, here are the notes that he's playing, but also like how he's playing them and the style and the vibe. And to me, that's so important.
And that part of the personality that comes through that stuff is just like so effortless sounding to him. Who knows what it was like to be him, but it's just all there, and it's like it just sounds and feels like second nature in a way that some of us overlook that stuff because we're focused on note choices or whatever else.
Yeah, that's something I tell my students all the time. Is like, man, it's so much more important, not more important, but just as important to learn the style, to learn the time, to learn the articulation, to learn all of those nuances as well as the notes. It's coupling those two things together that really makes transcribing Bird or Stitt or Cannonball. That's what made their playing was those unique personality things.
Yeah. Agreed.
Well, I'd be curious to know who are some of your other kind of major influences, whether it's on the alto or another instrument or another saxophone. Who are some of the other guys that you checked out early on?
Well, I think my biggest influences, are not, for the most part, alto players, with the exception of Ornette.
Oh.
And Cannonball. I mean, and Bird. But in terms of like the things that I think have informed my kind of musical personality, I would say Lester Young,
Ooh.
Stan Getz, Bill Evans. Those three people. Bill Evans, the pianist,
Yeah.
were the kind of the biggest sort of figures in my early jazz. I mean, early in my life jazz listening, and then a little bit later on, Keith Jarrett, Matheny, and all along the way, Miles. I mean, like from the beginning through to the middle, through to now, through to the end. Yeah, I mean, and I say that you might not identify those influences in my playing because, I'll leave that to anyone who's listening to this to decide whether they can hear any of that in me. I'd be very flattered if they can. So yeah, those are kind of like the biggest sort of like, it's not really about, I mean, well, it is about playing because everything ends up in your playing, but it's really just about kind of musical world.
Yeah, I love that. To me, it's like all those different influences make you. It's like whether you grab something specifically or not, it's like in some way, whether it's conscious or subconscious, that makes up the way that you compose, that makes up the way that you improvise, that makes up everything that you do.
Yeah. Well, also for me, like the important things about those people are things that are really hard to imitate. Like there are some players that you might listen to, and it's really clear like what you can take in terms, what you can actually steal from their playing and like just use in your own vocabulary. But and another big two big influences are Monk and Wayne Shorter. And those are two people that if you try to actually imitate them, then you just sound like a moron, because their process is what leads them to sound the way that they do. It's not like just like material that's pre-existing that they just regurgitate. So if you try to regurgitate stuff that they've played and use it in your playing, it's just not right. It's so those kinds of influences are maybe like a little bit less detectable. As I say, part of me wishes that they were a bit more detectable, but
yeah, that's funny that you say that about Monk. It gets me thinking like, yeah, that's completely spot on what you just said. He is hard to, like, imitating him wouldn't sound right even if you're doing it right. Like,
let's face it, we've all heard people sort of imitate it, right, at some point in our lives.
Right.
And it just, nah.
So I want to talk a little bit about, you growing up in London and then moving to New York and kind of some of the things that you did in New York that kind of helped establish yourself. I think there's going to be a lot of people listening that are trying to establish themselves, whether as a sideman or as a band leader. And what were some of the things you did when you first moved to New York to kind of break into the scene?
So you were asking me about New York. Okay. Well, I mean, like right at the beginning, I went to school. I went to Manhattan School of Music, and I as you mentioned, I grew up in London, and I was a really shy teenager, and I wasn't part of any scene, even though London is a big city with a lot of musicians in it. I was never part of that. I went to go and see music all the time. Like there's a great club there called Ronnie Scott's, which back in those days, I mean it's still a great club, but in those days it's like it was amazing for me because they would have like it was like the Village Vanguard. Like every week they would have a week long run.
Residency.
Yeah, a residency, and they would have two bands. So they'd have like the main attraction, and then there'd be an opening band, which would like be like a local band, like a London band, and that meant that like I could basically see anyone I wanted to, because even though I was in high school, like there were certain nights of the week where it was more feasible for me to go out. So I would go out on like a Thursday night, and with my possibly forged student ID, it cost me £2 to get in, which is like $3.
Okay.
And then you get to spend the whole night. You see four sets of music.
Whoa.
Yeah, because the opening band would play, and then like Brecker or James Moody I saw a bunch of times, or the Mingus Big Band, or and who else did I say? I saw Potter when he was super young with Paul Motian and Rosenwinkel, Brad Shepik, and Steve Swallow. All those guys. So the opening band would play, and then they would play, and then the opening band would come back, where you would often kind of feel sorry for the opening band, because like the Brecker brothers have just like blown the roof off, and then anyway. Yeah, so I was exposed to like some of the greatest musicians on earth all the time, which is great.
Yeah, what a list of names! Wow. I
wasn't. I mean, I saw so much more. I'm trying to think, but I wasn't part of a scene, and I moved to New York to go to school, and honestly, like I didn't know what I was getting into moving to New York. Somehow, for me, like it was too scary trying to leave school in the UK and trying to enter the London scene, because I've been kind of looking up at all those people for a long time. Yeah. So instead I went to New York. I mean, that doesn't make any sense. But I'm glad I didn't know what I was doing, because if I had, I probably wouldn't have done it. So I went to school, and and then started to establish like a community of musicians that I was in school with, and suddenly everything becomes a little bit more real and a bit more, a bit less of a fantasy. So yeah, I was in school with let's see, Miguel Zenon, Jaleel Shaw, Thomas Morgan, the bass player, Obed Calvert, Tim Green, another great alto player, was at school. So I was surrounded by all these people, and it's just like it was great, because it was simultaneously like terrifying and inspiring, and you just knew that like you had to really take it seriously. And yeah, so I went to, I'm telling the long version of the story, but I went to school, and then of course, like I'm out in the world, and I still carried a bit of that sort of thing that I'm sure most musicians, even the musicians who seem like they're not like this, musicians are sensitive people, and it's really hard to like put yourself out there. I think for most people, some people are comfortable with it, and I envy and admire those people. But it's hard because I think one of the reasons is because as an artist, you can't be an artist. You can't be an artist unless you're honest with yourself about your shortcomings, right? Because you can't develop. So if you're honest about your shortcomings and you spend like hours a day, like focusing on them, it's really hard to just not forget about those when you're in the company of other people that you want to play with and stuff. I remember the first time I met Ben Monder, the guitarist.
Oh yeah.
He was playing a gig, and I was talking to him because we were maybe going to do something with somebody else, but we hadn't met yet. And I was talking to him and telling him that I admired his playing and everything. And he said, "Oh yeah, hey, how long have you been in New York?" And I was like, "Oh well, like seven years now, I think." And he was like, "Oh, you just got here." And I was like, "Oh well, I guess in a way I did." I mean, it's not a there are very few people for whom anything just like happens overnight. It's like a gradual process, and you build relationships in layers. Different people that you play with and hang with, and that's just been the case, ever since the beginning. And doing sessions and meeting people and inviting people to. I mean, one thing that I did was I very early on, I managed to kind of develop a relationship with Quiva Lutz, who ran the 55 bar. She died at actually probably like 12 years ago now, but she was really good to me. She gave me I had a gig there like every, I don't know, month or something.
Oh, great.
And so I could invite people that I wanted to play with, and I played with a lot of musicians who I wouldn't have played with otherwise, and who weren't going to hire me, because let's face it, as an alto player, unless you're in like the large ensemble world, you are kind of you're not a priority for people putting bands together. Like there's a lot of trios, obviously, and then if there are quartets, they're usually led by the horn player, or if it's somebody else's band and they're hiring a horn player, quite most of the time it's tenor.
Yeah.
Or maybe it'll be trumpet or something. So like you're not, your phone is not ringing off the hook, so you have to make things happen. So I so I did a lot of gigs at 55 bar and hired people that I just wanted to play with, but whose company I just wanted to be in, like on stage. Stage, it's a bar, but so Chris Potter was kind and did a couple of gigs with me there, and Adam Rogers and like guys of that generation, like a little bit older than me, but super accomplished, and already had amazing careers by the time I got to New York. Even though, I mean, I think Chris is like maybe 6 or 7 years older than me. So I built connections that way, and it's a very like in terms of talking to younger musicians who are going through it now. I think everybody kind of knows what they have to do. Like there aren't too many secrets. You just have to. It's about stamina, and about just making connections. Obviously, right now, that's an incredibly hard thing to do, and actually an irresponsible thing to do. So it's, I feel so bad for young musicians, especially people who have just moved to New York or like just graduated. If they went to college and like just about, they just want to hit the ground running, and and they just hit the ground.
Right.
So obviously I didn't have to deal with that, but maybe actually, maybe some of those people will just have so much pent up energy when this is all over that they'll just that it will give them a bit of an extra kick where they need it when this crisis fades. I hope so. But
definitely. So, speaking on that topic, what kind of things are you doing now to kind of combat that? Are you practicing more? Are you listening more? What kind of things are you doing now?
Well, look, to be perfectly honest with you, this is a period where I would have been largely locked down anyway, because I have a 3-year-old daughter, and we just had my wife and I just had a baby son. He's 7 months now.
Oh, congratulations!
Nearly 7 months. So, I don't want to be, don't want to make light of anything, but actually, if there has to be a pandemic, this wasn't a bad time for it, because we're in the trenches with a baby, and it's actually been, my intention was not to tour, at least, which is mostly what I do. I mean, obviously I record and stuff when I'm in New York, but most of my activities is touring. you know, I wasn't going to do anything like that for 6 months or so. But now it looks like I'll have a whole year of not doing, or more, of not touring, and that's actually been, there's been some real silver lining to that, because I get to spend all this time with my kids. So
Right.
so that's really nice. However, I have been doing some things. I mean, nobody wants my life story, but when the pandemic hit, I was in New York with my wife and daughter, and my wife was 7 months pregnant, and my wife is from Australia, and we're going to have this baby in 2 months, and the hospitals were already starting to get overwhelmed in New York, and we just made a call. We were just like, let's go, let's get out of here. And it wasn't an easy, well, it kind of was an easy decision to make, but it was like the difficulty of it kind of came later when you realize what you've done, you know. But we just made a decision. 24 hours later, we were on a plane, and we came here, and so, you know, and there's basically no COVID down here. Australia has just done a spectacular. It's one of the handful of countries in the world that's really nailed it. And so life is kind of normal, but of course, you know, it isn't normal. It isn't normal in the sense that, you know, I can't play with any of the people that I would usually be playing with, and you know, I have a new record out, which no doubt we'll mention at some point, which, you know, we haven't been able to tour or anything like that, but I've been working on a few things. I decided to start writing big band arrangements, which I'd never done before, and I recorded them remotely with an amazing array of musicians who I couldn't believe were up for it, including John Ellis, Alan Ferber, Mike Morena, Lage Lund, Ben Wendell, Gonzalo Bocaba, Mike Rodriguez, Alex Sipiagin, Linda Eto. They all, you know, helped me record these things, and so I've got some, you know, I made some videos that are on YouTube of those, which is really fun. And then, sort of partly spurred from that, next week I'll be going to Sydney, Australia, to do a recording with the Conservatory Big Band.
Oh, nice.
And they've commissioned 5 composers: Tim Garland, Alan Ferber, Guillermo Klein, Miho Hazama, and Florian Ross to arrange some of my tunes, and we're gonna record them, which is, I'm really excited about that. So,
that's awesome.
And then we'll also do the arrangements that I've done. So that's been a project that's been coming together sort of sporadically, because you know, suddenly there's like a COVID cluster, and everything shuts down, and you can't travel and stuff. But I think, you know, assuming everything goes to plan, I'll be in Sydney next week doing that. And Trio Grande has come out, which is my new record, a co-led record with me, Gilad Hexelman, and Antonio Sanchez, which, as I say, like, it's an unusual CD release because we can't perform, and we're in 3 different continents.
Right.
But I'm really excited about that, because it's a band that I feel really good about, and I feel really good about the record, and I can't wait to actually tour with these guys. But it's had some really good responses, so that's been fun to watch, even though we can't do anything.
Yeah, sure. So I'd be interested in, I mean, Gilad and Antonio are unbelievable musicians, but I was wondering, like, how you kind of decided to kind of choose them, and how you kind of tailored the music to them. How was this kind of the writing process different from other trio records that you've done with Owl Trio and other stuff that you've done?
Yeah.
How has this differed, this record?
Yeah, this trio is about as different from the Owl Trio as you could get. Even though it's like saxophone, guitar, and
sure.
Yeah, well, so this band has actually recorded before for Crisscross. We did a record called under my name called It's All Right with Three.
Mhm.
And that's a very spontaneous thing. I've wanted to do a trio record with guitar and drums for years, since I first saw the Paul Motian trio with Bill Frisell and Joe Romano about 25 years ago. I mean, really a really long time ago. I saw them in London, actually. So when I was a kid, and a few times. And I've always wanted to have a bassless trio like that. I love bass players as much as anybody else does, but there's just something about the possibilities for a kind of like nimble unit, like no one holding anything down necessarily, and the ability to kind of change textures in a very sort of radical way. Which obviously you can do with a bass player, but it's just it's a different thing. So, and I just haven't found the right time or the right people to do that with. And Jerry Teakins, God rest his soul, called me, and in a typical Jerry Teakins way, Crisscross asked me to do a record. He's asked me if I wanted to do a record in like 2 weeks' time. And I happened to be out, I think the same night that he called, and I went to see Gilad. He was doing a residency at Cornelia Street, God rest his soul, with trios, like a variety of different trios. And one of them was Antonio and Becca Stevens. And they were just calling tunes, and I was like, man, what's this going to sound like? Like, really, I had no clue. And it was great, I mean, as you would expect. And I think I sat in, and I just thought, well, maybe this is it.
Huh.
It's like, I'll be Becca, and you guys, can do my record. And they were available, and so we did it. Maybe I should have had Becca on it, actually. But we did much the same thing. We called tunes, and there were a couple of my originals.
Sure.
On that record, and it was really fun. And then we kind of went our separate ways, and we're doing our thing. And then I just decided that I wanted to try to do something with this, and I wrote to the guys about maybe doing a tour or something with that trio. And ultimately, between us, we decided that actually maybe we should do it, but have it be like an actual band, instead of being my thing, which to me just was like, it wasn't my suggestion, but I was so happy when those guys wanted to do that, because that really indicates like another level of investment in the music when everybody is equally in there. And so we just were like, okay, cool, we don't have a label, we don't have any plans, we everyone's kind of busy, we don't really have time to tour or anything like that, but let's take these 2 days when we're all in town in April 2019 to record. And we did like a very short rehearsal. We all brought music. We brought like 3 tunes each that we thought we could work with pretty easily. And it just happened. And it's different from the Crisscross record because partly because of the material, but also because we were just like, well, we don't have a bass player, but that doesn't mean that we can't have any bass. And we did a little bit of overdubbing and post-production and stuff like that. So there are some tunes that have like really kind of strong bass riffs and bass lines, but actually it makes more sense to do them without a bass player, because most of the bass players that we love playing with wouldn't just want to play that riff the whole time. So it was kind of cool. It's just like, okay, we're just going to do it this way. We're going to loop this, or we're going to pre-record this, or but I think we did it all in a way that we can recapture when we play live, if we ever play live.
Right.
So yeah, that was exciting, and I'm of course, when the funny thing about this pandemic is like because it wasn't anyone's first priority, because we all have our other things. it kind of like the can was kicked down the road a little bit in terms of release date, and then COVID happened, and then all of a sudden nobody's doing anything. And you're like, okay, well let's do it. Is this a stupid time to put out a record? Let's find out. And we did.
Awesome. Well, everybody, do yourself a favor. Check out Trio Grand. Incredible album, amazing musicians, great compositions. The link is right there below. Again, do yourself a favor, check out this amazing record. One last question for you, Will. Again, thank you so much for spending the time talking today. It's been super great to talk to you. I was wondering what advice you would have for somebody who's looking to make a career in music, whether it's a saxophone player or a pianist or someone who's wants to make a living in jazz. What would be some of your advice? Something that maybe you wish you knew when you were early on.
Something I wish I knew. I mean, I guess, well, a couple of things. Okay, so I just sort of randomly, like I'll say two things. One of them musical and one of them kind of like career.
Cool.
First of all, musically, like just be honest with yourself as a musician, and don't. I think a lot of young players have flaws in their playing and in their musicianship that they know that they have. But I suppose because our generation, you know, our generation went to college for jazz. We're used to being told when there's an issue that we need to deal with, but then we go out into the world and everyone's just like, oh man, yeah, you sound great, you know, all this stuff. And sometimes I think there's a tendency among young musicians to feel like they've maybe those flaws that they know about don't matter, or that they've gotten away with them because they're not being hammered on them. And so number one would be like, address those things. They are a problem. If you think that they might be a problem, then they are a problem that you need to work on. Nobody else is going to make you work on it, because once you're out of school, you're out of school. Even when you're in school, often, you know, those things will go, if not undetected, but they can become kind of the ghost in the machine if you're not careful. And for me, like the biggest one of those things was time. So I would say that, and then I would also say that just understand that a career in jazz is not a normal or rational thing that you know, anyone in their right mind would set off in life to do. You do it because, well, as my first jazz piano teacher told me when I was a kid, he said, I think he could tell that I was, you know, like getting kind of serious and wanted to be a musician. Mm-hmm. He said, he said, it's great that you want to do that, but don't do it unless you would rather be dead than do anything else. That's why you do it. I mean, that's, you know, he was being dramatic, but right. There's some logic to that. So don't imagine that it's going to be like a rational or like a normal unfolding career. Like you have to be prepared for as many things as there are that exist in the world, and you have to be able to you need to be prepared to work with as many different, you know, in as many different environments as there might be. And you might find yourself doing some things that you didn't expect or you didn't set out to do, and you might really not like those things, and so you'll discover that you don't like those things, but you might discover that you do like those things. They might teach you something about yourself or about music that you didn't know. But ultimately, like you kind of need to be promiscuous in a way. Like you need to do a lot of different stuff, and you're in terms of the career aspect of what you're doing, you're going to have to cover a lot of bases, because that's just the way the business is. Which, of course, doesn't mean that you shouldn't also keep a strict focus on what it is that you know you need to do. There's no reason really why why doing something that wasn't primary your primary focus shouldn't have a beneficial and positive effect on your musicianship as a whole, right? Yeah, that's not a very concise way of putting it, but that's
Yeah, that's great. I think I love what you said about, you may not be doing a thing that you like, but there's so many things along the way. Like, especially now, like as saxophonists, we need to be playing, multiple saxophones. We need to be playing the flute. We need to know how to book a tour if you don't have a touring manager. If you need to know how to do this and this and this, and all these things are kind of involved with being a musician in 2020.
Yeah, I mean, look, the business, when I was at school, they were just beginning a business of jazz program, and I didn't take it. But my God, like you I mean, it's not really surprising that so many musicians are kind of in a certain state of disarray in their lives, because they've trained to do one thing, and then suddenly they find that 90% of what they're doing with their lives is something totally different in order to do that thing, right? So take that stuff seriously. I mean, I'm really inspired actually by how people of the generation below me, people in their 20s, seem to be really kind of entrepreneurial and taking that stuff seriously, the way they use social media, whatever. And sometimes, even if it's not to my taste, it's like, this stuff is, this world is hard, and people are taking initiative and broadening their capabilities and stuff, and I really admire that.
And I love what you said about practicing, your flaws and being honest with yourself. I had a professor in college. It's one of the first days of school, and he stood up, and all the professors introducing themselves. Hi, I'm so and so. I teach whatever. And the drum professor, Ed Soph, is at North Texas. Ed Soph stands up and he says, "If you sound good when you're practicing, you're not practicing." And as a freshman in college, that completely blew my mind. And all we have to do is focus on what we're bad at and attack that every day in the practice room. And really, it's that simple. There's no secret to any of this. It's just putting in the time and practicing what you're bad at, and trying to make your art the highest level possible. So, well, thank you, Will, so much for talking with me today. It was a pleasure to meet you and talk with you. Thank you, Dario, for presenting this awesome series. If you are looking to get a percentage off on any of your favorite Diodario gear, use the code Hahn25. That's Hahn, Hahn 25. Get 25% off and free shipping on orders of $50 or more until Christmas. So thank you, Will, again so much. Thank you, Diodario, for having us, and looking forward to next time.
Thank you.